Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are joining us from. I'm Alan from ISWA, and I'm introducing today's webinar on Masterclass EPR systems, and vertical integration. Thank you for connecting with us from all around the world. Over 350 people registered of over 52 countries for this webinar. We will be joined today by 4 experts on EPR who will talk to you about EPR systems and vertical integration. You are encouraged to type your questions in the questions window to your right. We will be choosing a few of these questions for the speakers to answer in the end. This webinar is a continuation of a series of webinars jointly organized by the International Solid Waste Association, the Extended Producer Responsibility Alliance, and the Product Stewardship Institute to explain the concept of extended producer responsibility, its various applications, as well as diving into hot topics and specific details. I would like to take a brief moment to introduce ISWA here, as several of you joining today are not yet members. The International Solid Waste Association is a global, independent, and non-profit making association working in the public interest, and is the only worldwide association promoting comprehensive and professional waste management and the transition to a circular economy. We are open to individuals and organizations, members from the scientific community, public institutions, and private and public companies from all over the world working in the field of waste management or just interest in waste management. ISWA is the only worldwide waste association that enables its members to network with professionals, companies, and institutional representatives. The mission of ISWA is to promote and develop sustainable and professional waste management worldwide, and we have members from over 100 countries. We count on the support of our members, so if you're not yet a member, please take a moment to visit our membership page by visiting the link on the screen. Or you could also reach out to our membership manager, Mr. Daniel Purchase, by writing to him at dpurchase@iswa.org. We have some flexible membership options. We have discounts for students, low-income countries, and online members as well. Thank you so much for connecting today. I would like to give now the floor to Mr. Joachim Quoden from EXPRA. He will be leading the webinar for you from this moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan, for this introduction, and a warm welcome to all of you. A warm welcome to participate in the third of our series of EPR webinars. EXPRA as a partner with ISWA and PSI to organize these webinars to increase the understanding, the knowledge, to make all interested people able to discuss on a knowledge-based basis about EPR, and not to do it like we face in football, where everyone is a trainer and has the better idea than the national one. EXPRA is an alliance of 26 producer responsibility organizations, all owned by the so-called obliged industry, and all work on a non-profit basis. And we are very proud that our members serve over 200 million people with a convenient infrastructure for collection, sorting, and recycling, always trying to improve the convenience and to improve the operations year by year. We have members not only from Europe, but also from Canada, from Israel, from Turkey, and hopefully very soon from South America as well. So it's a global approach, and we all try to work together as much as possible. Besides the membership work and our activities to be the voice in Brussels, to pass the messages that will help our members to improve their work. We are active in a lot of very important industry initiatives, not only ISWA, but I would like also to mention the packaging value projects like Close the Glass Loop, like C-Flex to make flexible packaging circular, or the Holy Grail project, developing a new sorting technology based on water marking. Very interesting, and it might, if it works in the end, revolutionize the way how we sort and deal with packaging or even other products. We tried in the first edition of this webinar series, we tried to explain the basics. What is EPR? That EPR is a concept, but the adoption is very specific to the local circumstances. But it has also invited many countries to introduce ideology, experiments, belief. So we need a lot of exchange of best practices and best failures to go the next step to improve our systems, to try to go for more harmonization and to look for synergies. Everything is possible in the way how currently EPR is implemented, and one difference is whether a country has decided for a single service provider or to allow and to accredit several PROs. You can find this in Germany, in Austria, but also in many Eastern European countries nowadays, also in Portugal, etc. But even if you say a country has accredited several PROs, you have to ask more questions. How is the competition amongst PROs working? Because still you have a lot of differences there. Like in Germany and in Austria, the various PROs, in Germany I think 9 or 10, they are sharing the collection infrastructure. And only after the collection, the material is given to each and every PRO depending on the market share. Then you have the approach that each PRO has to contract with a number of local authorities. And in this district, you are more or less exclusively working as a PRO. And then you have Estonia. I always say the paradise for competition authorities, because the 3 accredited PROs have to establish a parallel infrastructure. So in the worst case, you might go to a square and you see 3 different containers for plastic packaging, and the consumer is asked to decide into which of the containers he is putting his packaging. Whether this makes sense or not, I think it's up to each and everyone to decide. Luckily, after 4 or 5 years of discussion, the European Union decided that it's time to streamline the existing systems, time to improve them. And as it is not easy for member states to do this voluntary, to do this improvement mandatory by agreeing minimum requirements for EPR. A lot of rules on transparency. If you have competition, you need an independent oversight, etc., etc. So this was approved 2018. In theory, all the member states should have already transposed this into national legislation. The deadline was July 21, July this year. But I think only the French have really approved the new legislation. All the other member states are late and are just working on the first draft. So unfortunately, this will take probably another year or 2 until all member states have implemented these important changes into their national approach. Of course, also the OECD looked into this problem of competing PROs, and I think it's quite interesting to see where the costs are caused within the EPR system. And the majority of the costs are caused by the collection and sorting, and then followed by treatment and recycling. So the pure PRO costs are just 5 to 10% of the whole market, on which in the end the PROs could compete if you have a fair level playing field. Whether this makes sense or not, again, it's up to each and everyone to decide. Before we start now, before I give the floor to a good colleague of mine, Oliver Bretz, he's a lawyer, so be careful. He's a lawyer and even an antitrust lawyer, and he did some studies on EPR competition and vertical integration, meaning if waste management companies or recyclers are running a PRO as well. Before we go to this, just a word on my, in brackets, ISWA working group, governance and legal issues. We are discussing horizontal matters there, including EPR. We have done a lot of work on EPR in this working group, a key issue paper, as well as a library of currently 26 contributions about the topic. Plus now we are partner of this webinar series. So if you are a member of ISWA, if you are interested in these horizontal topics, please join our working group. So yeah, this is the third one. We had the first one about the basics, the second one about the fees, and if you have already EPR fees, how to modulate them to take into account environmental considerations, for example, to modulate them whether they are recyclable or difficult to recycle. The next one will be about best practices from countries. And it seems like we will have 3 presentations, one from Canada, one from Italy, and probably one from Bulgaria. I think that might deliver a lot of interesting insights for you as the audience as well. But now still competition, and I pass to Oliver Bretz. He did this study about EPR, vertical integration, and how a government or which risks a government and the market might face, and how you can deal with them. Oliver, thanks a lot for participating, and the floor is yours. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Joachim, for that very kind introduction. Welcome from Brussels, where the sun is not shining, but that is quite usual in Brussels. I hope everyone is well. We had the privilege of doing a study for EXPRA to look at the potential problems and risks associated with vertical integration. And really, in these few slides, I'm going to take you through the very high-level summary of what we found. I think it is fair to say that we had a lot of participation from EXPRA members, and we were able to effectively gather information rather than data. It wasn't hard data, but information from the different EU member states to see what sort of experiences existed in member states where there was vertical integration. So this is not entirely theoretical, but obviously the analytical framework is a competition law or antitrust analytical framework. So it may be slightly different from the sort of language that you might be used to. So if I could ask Daniele, my colleague, just to turn to the first slide. So here you effectively have a traditional system, and I don't really want to spend a huge amount of time on it because I expect a lot of you are very, very familiar with this. But essentially, the way that the extended producer responsibility works is that you have the obliged companies. The obliged companies effectively fulfill their obligations through PROs, which are effectively a collective way of dealing with that responsibility. And then, as Joachim has already outlined, the way that these PROs are owned and run will effectively differ depending on the member state. Some member states prescribe it to be not-for-profit, but other member states, for example, allow competition and then say, but you cannot own more than a certain shareholding in a PRO if you are a waste management company, for example. So the question really is, what experience do we have about the sorts of risks that vertical integration can bring? So if we go to the next slide, which I'm hoping will pop up, there we have effectively the sort of the sort of setup that you would expect in a system. And I want to perhaps just use this slide to define how we would talk about the market. So the obliged companies are the customers. So the flow of fees is from the bottom to the top. The PROs purchase services from waste management companies and recyclers. So as an antitrust lawyer, I would think of the waste management companies and the recyclers as being upstream, because effectively they provide essential services to the PROs. So when I talk about upstream and downstream, it may be slightly different from the experience that you have in your countries. So effectively, vertical integration, what does it mean? It effectively means that you have corporate groups being created around these structures. And if we can turn perhaps to the next slide. So here we have a very simple example. You have a PRO, a waste management company, and a recycler, and they're operating separately. So each of these will want to profit maximize. They will want to effectively attract as much business as possible in order to cover their fixed costs, and they're taking decisions independently. So that is the non-vertically integrated model, 3 operators effectively maximizing profitability and taking their own decisions on how they effectively use their capacity, trying to maximize the utilization of that capacity in order to maximize profits. Now let's turn to the next slide. Here we have effectively the PRO being part of the same group as the waste management company. And what becomes obvious here is that as a group, this group might actually embark on strategies to maximize the profitability of the group as a whole, which means looking at how it might effectively maximize the profitability of the waste management company and the PRO combined. And that strategy might be short-term, it could be medium-term, or it could be long-term. But you can see how immediately, the moment you draw a circle around that, the incentives, of course, start to change. Let's go to the next figure. So if you see here, we have taken the same example, but here effectively the PRO is in the same group as a recycler. And you can see again how suddenly you have a different set of incentives operating as you've drawn a circle around it. And in the final one, this is the most extreme example. Here, the recycler and the waste management company are all of them in the same group as the PRO. And you can see suddenly how the incentives may be different yet again. So what are we talking about when we talk about vertical integration? We talk about the risk of vertical foreclosure. And that is a technical term that lawyers like to use. It means nothing to real people, but what it essentially means is the ability to cut people off. Foreclosure means the ability to cut people off, and that can be total foreclosure, which means you cut them off completely, or it could be partial foreclosure, which means that you just deteriorate the service, or you just don't respond, or you effectively serve them more slowly. So foreclosure can be total or partial. We're not going to worry about that for the purposes of this presentation, but effectively foreclosure means cutting people off. So Daniela, if we can go to the next slide. So if we look at how foreclosure strategies might actually work, and remember, these are examples that we have taken from some of the evidence we have had. So we're not saying that this will definitely happen. We're just saying these are the sorts of strategies that you might see in a vertically integrated model. So here, effectively, the waste management company and the PRO are part of the same group. And so what you could have here is that the group might decide not to offer the services of the waste management company to other PROs, either at equivalent conditions or at all. Now, equivalent conditions means price. It could mean other terms. So it is effectively discrimination or otherwise put self-favoring. Or you might say, you know what, we're going to cut off this waste management company and just use it for our own purposes, make it captive, and then effectively it's not available to the market. And the idea of doing this would be that obviously if it is successful, and remember, for it to be successful, you have to have effectively the ability and the incentive to foreclose. If it is successful, then over time, the combined group will have an advantage over other PROs who are then going to find it much more difficult to compete. So that's sort of the first fundamental foreclosure strategy that could work. But there could be other foreclosure strategies. If we go to the next figure, here we have a form of customer foreclosure, which is really sort of the opposite of the same thing. And here we say, okay, the PRO effectively is captive to the recycler, and it will not entertain effectively any bids from any other recycler. And again, this is something which could be total, where you just say, look, in this example, PRO1 will no longer be tendering, but more likely than not, it's going to be more covert, which is that it will be obtaining information through bids from other recyclers, but it simply won't entertain those bids or entertain them within a reasonable time frame. Now, some of you might be very astute and say, well, actually, could both types of foreclosure coexist? The answer is yes, potentially they can coexist if there is a market structure that effectively promotes the ability and the incentive for those foreclosure strategies to exist in tandem. So the fundamental point is that either the strategy is aimed at rival PROs, making their life more difficult, or it is, in the second example, aimed at rival waste management companies or recyclers to make their life more difficult, or indeed, it could be both. So that's the fundamental framework that we are talking about. So I think we can go to the next slide. The other risk that we identified is obviously the risk of information leakage. And I have to say, this is not unique to your industry. I mean, we have, this is a very well-trodden path, for example, in the insurance sector, where if an insurer owns a broker, then you have the risk of information leakage from the broker to the insurer about what rivals are doing. It's the same issue, so it's not unique. It's just that obviously here it is quite stark, because what you can have in an integrated group is you can have commercially sensitive information leaking here in this example between the waste management company 1 and the PRO 1 about the commercial strategies of PRO 2 and PRO 3. And remember, PRO 2 and 3 may be dependent on waste management company 1 and may therefore be in a position where they have to disclose certain information and they don't want it to leak. So I think the first risk here is information leakage, effectively down to the PRO. But there could be other types of information leakage. And if we can go to the next figure, here effectively you have the inverse of that, where effectively the waste management company or recycler benefits from information that the PRO has about the activities of competing recyclers or waste management companies. So again, there could be a situation where a recycler waste management company is disadvantaged as a result of its commercially sensitive or competitive information leaking within the integrated group. And that is another risk. And of course, again, some of you might point out that both these risks can coexist. And again, it is absolutely possible for these risks to coexist. And you obviously need to, in general terms, make sure that whatever regulation you put in place or whatever compliance you put in place addresses both those risks. So long term, what of course you might see is that if you have companies that have information leakage within the group, or indeed that are able to engage in foreclosure strategies, they will in the medium to long term have advantages over others with whom they compete. So that's effectively what they're doing. They're profit maximizing as a group at the expense of others. And that's the problem. So if we can go to the next slide. So what about downstream leakage? And here you effectively have the question of, could you have a PRO which is owned by one or more of the obliged companies, and effectively that could lead to also having information leakage about the activities of other PROs that are also providing services. So in a traditional competition analysis, you would be worried about cartel behavior. Of course, here, when you look at this figure, there's almost no need for a cartel, because if you have information that regularly goes across, then you effectively end up with a degree of transparency as a result of this, which effectively means that there is the ability to coordinate competitive behavior downstream. So this exists every time where the PRO effectively competes for the business of other obliged companies. If it's completely captive and it only provides services to the obliged companies that own it, then obviously that risk is reduced. But that is really what we mean when we talk about the risk of downstream leakage. Daniel, if we can go to the next slide. So where did that sort of lead us? Now, obviously, there are certain EU member states that effectively ban the vertical integration of PROs completely. However, we think that is probably a bit of a sledgehammer, and I think it was probably better for us to really think about how competition law might actually fit into the framework and give us some guidance. So the first point is to say that obviously if you have a merger case, then quite often a merger case has to be notified to a competition authority. So if there is a merger case between a waste management company and a PRO, for example, that would may need to be notified to the competition authorities. And the competition authorities at that stage need to be very, very aware of these issues. But there is a more fundamental question, which is, if there is no merger, what sort of measures could actually prevent the distortion and the dysfunctional dynamics arising, and how do you address these risk factors? Now, obviously, it would be great if we had a harmonized European approach to this, but of course, we simply don't have that. And so you probably need to think about how one might regulate compliance in such a way that prevents these risks from arising. And this is a well-trodden path. It is not something that we've just made up. It exists in a lot of industries. So whenever you have a vertically integrated model, and that could be in insurance, it could be in banking, it could be in other sectors, you effectively end up with a compliance framework which prevents the senior management of the two entities from being the same. You make sure that the management of each entity is profit maximizing within itself, and that the reporting lines do not disclose commercially sensitive information either upstream or downstream. In as far as you move managers across from one entity to the other, you have appropriate cooling off periods. You make sure that any confidential information they have is no longer current, but is somewhat dated before they move to a new job. And you can also have some frameworks around how the budget and business plans are set in order to effectively profit maximize within each entity, as opposed to trying to profit maximize the group as a whole. So effectively, information barriers are a good thing. Information barriers exist in a lot of industries, and I would posit that whenever you have vertical integration, I think information barriers and separate management are clearly things that you would want to look for. Now, information barriers, people immediately say, well, what are we talking about? How effective do these have to be? And I would answer that question by saying they have to be effective. I can't tell you what they would be, but effectively, you would expect at least people to be on separate floors. You'd expect them to be, separated out, to basically not have access to the same canteen, to the same systems. The IT systems should clearly be separate. The roles should be clearly defined and separate. And you really don't want staff to casually move around between the PRO and the waste management company, for example. But fundamentally, what this points to is that there needs to be a bit of a fundamental rethink. And this is really the sort of final idea that I want to leave you with, because I'm almost out of time. But the final idea I want to leave you with is that the moment you allow competition between PROs, you also need to start worrying about vertical integration, because for-profit PROs will effectively end up being owned by someone. Now, obviously, the latest development is that we're seeing large retailers effectively either buying or setting up their own PROs. So they will be owned by someone. The moment they end up being owned by industry players, you need to worry about vertical integration. The risks are the ones that I have set out, but the solutions are also available. The solutions are probably not a total ban on vertical integration, but a very comprehensive set of rules that have to be followed in order to make sure that there is proper separation and proper functioning and effective information barriers. So I think I'm out of time, but those were the messages that I wanted to get across from our little study. I wanted to thank all the EXPRA members again for their very valuable input into our research. And as I said, these are not definitive conclusions. It's very much looking at risks and then identifying how those risks can be mitigated. So Joachim, I'm going to hand back to you, and I'm going to turn my camera off.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this, Oliver. I think especially, although it is in principle a very theoretical and dry topic, I think you made it very lively and understandable. So a big thanks for this. Huh?
Thank you.
And this leads me already to the next speaker, Alexander. He's the Secretary General of the German Central Agency, and he is facing every day probably the situation partly perhaps that Oliver was describing, as in the German EPR approach. You have 9 or 10 accredited systems. Some of them are owned by waste management companies. A few are owned by investors. One is now owned even by a retailer, who is then owning also waste management companies and recyclers. So I think we have everything what is possible. Just the industry-owned PRO is missing in Germany. But for this, we have now since 2 years the industry-owned non-for-profit foundation that should manage the former Wild West competition that we had. And as far as I heard, you are doing this in a wonderful and great way. So try to explain how this should work best, so that perhaps some other countries where still uncontrolled competition is happening can learn a lot. Thanks, Alexander.
Yeah, thanks, Joachim. Thanks for having me. Let me put something first. We are not controlling the vertical integration of the systems or something like that. As you said, we have very different PROs in Germany, different owned, differently integrated. But what was our problem, and I'm going to show that now, that was the competition of the PROs led to fundamental problems that nearly caused to collapse the whole market, and that was the reason why we were set up. But let's have a look in the rearview mirror and see what EPR in Germany was all about during the decades. It's nothing new. It was established in '93, and for around about 10 years, it was organized as a monopoly, and that was carried out by the Duales System Deutschland, the green dot. That worked fairly well, but we, starting at the 2000s, had the discussions about competition in the market, and the Federal Cartel Office in Germany and the European Commission put some pressure on, and so the market was open for competition. And that was the time, starting with 2003, where step by step more and more PROs entered the market, and the obliged companies had the possibility to choose where they want to participate. We had different problems at that time. There were loopholes in our formula regulation that allowed the obliged companies to, not really allowed them, but made it possible that they reduce their volume to participate at the EPRs on a scale that was just not according to the law. Let's put it like this. But also the competing systems that, as Joachim mentioned further, they share the infrastructure, and they have to share the costs of the infrastructure by their market share. So there was also the PROs trying to depress their market shares. And at the end, the costs of the whole system were much higher than the money the PROs earned. And in 2015, the system nearly collapsed. At that time, German retailers jumped in and funded the system, paid the money that had to be paid, but there was a big learning. And here I show you the degree of non-participation, so the shortfall over time, and you see the problems we had during the years. Glass worked well most of the time for different reasons. Consumers were used to the different collection of glass, and it's a market that is more transparent. It's mostly beverages, but as you see, with PPK is paper and LVP is plastics, so the lightweight packaging. We were always around, let's say, 40% shortfall, and that was the money that was needed in the market, but that wasn't there. So as we saw during that time, although the prices, which was nice for the obliged companies, have declined significantly from the times of the monopoly to the times of the competition, about 50%. That was much, but it was too much. It was, at the end, not enough money to pay for the whole system. There was just one conclusion, and that was a conclusion everybody drew at that time. It was politics, and it was industry across all sectors, and that was, there is no competition without supervision. We had a discussion for about 2 years for the new Packaging Act that entered into force then in 2019. And the main thing, there were different things the new Packaging Act regulated, but the main thing it set up the central agency, what I'm working now, as a control body for the PROs and for the obliged companies, not to forget. And I call this the restart of the EPR in Germany. And let's have a quick look at the old obligations we always had, and now the new obligation with the Packaging Act and with our new agency. It was always the obligation for a company to who place their packaging onto the German market, and the packaging that ends with the final consumer, to participate in a dual system, as we call them, the PROs in Germany. Now there's a new obligation. You don't only have to contract with the dual systems, but you always also have to register with our agency. This is for one time, the registration of your company, that is master data like company name, contact data, and so on. And then all the brand names that you place packaging onto the German market. That is very important. And this is something you couldn't delegate to any third party, not lawyers, not auditors. not trading partners, whatever. It has to be done by the company itself. And then there's data reporting. And this data reporting has to be the same as you report to your contract partner, the dual system. So you have to say which material types, plastics, paper, glass, etc., you place onto the market, under which brand, and the total mass of every material type. And you have to do it in the same rhythm you do with your dual system. If it is monthly, it's quarterly, whatever it is, the same data must be reported to the central agency now. And here's what we do with all of that. And that's the way we try to control the market. And we control as well the obliged companies, producers, as well as the systems. First of all, we give clear guidance on what packaging is part of the system, that has to be part of the system. As you saw a few slides before, it is said that ends up with the final consumer. That's not always clear. That's why we have a catalog on our website where for every packaging, the size of the packaging, the material that it's in the packaging, and so on, it is said, has it to be system participated, yes or no? So there is no more uncertainty for the companies, and even more important, there is no more intentional misinterpretation. We can oblige producers to make a declaration of completeness. That is important because if they do so, then they have to be audited. And as we also release the audit guidelines for the auditors, it is then clear that the report they make is really correct. So no more sub-participation, and also for the auditors, no more incorrect data reports, no more incorrect auditing. We get the same data from the dual systems, and then we double check the data. That means we look on everything the producer reports to us and the dual system reports to us, and everything that might be incorrect, every discrepancy, everything, we ask the systems, we ask the producers where that might come from. And this is important, so we can get, through this way, a very clear picture on the whole market, and that makes it possible for us to calculate the market share. And the market share is the important thing because dual systems have to pay the waste management collectors according to their market share. And for every violation, we provide the information concerning that to the enforcement authorities, which in Germany is with the states within Germany, as we are a federal agency. We do some other things too. We have a minimum standard for recycling-friendly design. This is important, I think, because this is how we try really to achieve environmental goals. We do, as I said, the market share calculations. And what you should know is with the recycling-friendly design standard, dual systems are obliged to make some incentives for the producers for packaging that is recycling friendly. And that is how we try, as I said, to reach the environmental goals on the packaging side of the market. And we started now to get, well, a few steps further. We don't only take the data from the producers and from the dual systems. We buy market data from providers, we double check them, we make research, we have built an analysis platform to compare data, and at the end our goal is to find all the producers who haven't registered with us at all, or who might have contracted with the dual systems with insufficient volume. This is important because I showed the shortfall we had during the time. We became much better since we started our work in 2019, but nevertheless, it's not 40% now, but it's still 25% with plastic packaging, with, that there is a shortfall, and it's our goal to find those companies and at the end force them to contract with dual systems for their volume. Some numbers for you. During the first years, our main concern, our main goal at the time is information, information, information. We are founded by the industry. We are an entrusted body. That means we can act as an authority, but nevertheless, our board of trustees is mainly industry, and we try to support industry. There are many small companies who just don't know what their obligations are, and as you see, we really try to help. We have everything on our website, also in English, explanatory films, documents, whatever you want, phone service, and on this way we try to inform and bring transparency into the market, and hopefully we'll have during the time a participation that really funds the system in a long-running way. So that, all in all, short, what we do here at the central agency in Germany.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I think it was an interesting way in the last 30 years since the Duale System was founded. I think 2 weeks ago it was the birthday of the DSD, and then the system went live in '93. A lot of experience, a lot of failures, yes. But I think for a very long time we were setting also the standards. How to do it, and I really think that we are now again in Germany on the way up to be amongst the best performing systems to set the standards. And with the central agency, I think you have set a new standards how to oversee competition and how to steer the market to the right way. I think you did already a lot, and no one is speaking anymore that the system is collapsing. So congratulations that you did good work in your first 2 years. And it was not easy, as far as I know, with a lot of criticism and a lot of people who always knew how to do it better, of course.
Yeah, that is true. Thanks a lot. I think if there is one thing that can be learned from Germany, that is competition is very useful to get the prices down. As I said, it was about 50%. It was too much at that time, or over time, but it reduces prices for the obliged companies. That is important. But if you have the competition, I would say don't wait about 20 years, nearly 20 or 15 years like Germany did, to think about how to supervise it. Do that from the beginning, and it will work much better than it did for many years in Germany.
Yeah. But I'm so sorry to jump into this topic of the dropped prices because of competition. I think you have to add that between '93 and 2003, the German system was not allowed to call for tender because for different reasons there was a 10 years contract with the waste management companies. And then 2003, 2005, there were the first tenders being called to the waste management companies to apply for a new collection and sorting company. So you could say that this tendering brought the effect, but of course competition brought in the possibility to call for tender. So it is. I think we have to take this into account as well. That calling for tender, bringing competition to the collection and sorting is one of the very important aspects. If you are able to do it, this depends again on your national legislation as well. And I would just like to continue to ask a question, because I received many questions with regards to the shared collection of the infrastructure. The first, can you explain a little bit more how this is possible in Germany, and is it difficult to formulate it in a legislation? Because this seems attractive for many countries, that the consumers do not have to decide between various infrastructure.
Joachim, you might be much better able to explain that than I can, but I will try nevertheless. But you can add. The infrastructure. The infrastructure is from waste management companies, and for every era, there are many communities and cities and regions. The dual systems have contracts, and so all of them contract with the waste management company for one era. And at the end, they have to pay by their market share. So, and for every region, some other dual system makes the contracts, and this is there is a random there's a random way to put which dual system is responsible for which era.
Yeah, and I think from the conceptual approach, even if we have a dual system approach where industry is fully responsible for the operations, the local authorities decide which concrete collection model is used in their district. And of course, they go for one collection model. So they decide whether you collect by bag or by containers or by bins, and they collect and they decide more or less the frequency as well. And then this model has to be used by the 10 PROs by designing the tender on which the waste management companies can then send in a price offer. But so the concept is that local authorities decide on the one model for their district, and so they somehow block the possibility to establish several containers from several PROs in their district.
Absolutely, and it's unfortunately it's even more complicated, as it's separated between glass containers, between paper that is always collected by the municipalities, and all the I call it plastics, the lightweight packaging that is again in a different bin that's been collected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the tender that the PRO is then issuing, they reflect the model in agreement more or less with the local authority. So this I would say is the kind of standard for the collection someone was asking for. After collection, every PRO is free to find the sorting plant and the recycler for their share of the packaging that is collected.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's another question for you, Alexander, with regard to the new challenges from online sales. I saw the figure of that you estimate the number of companies selling into Germany with 300,000. Are you really have the idea to follow these 300,000? Probably most of them are even located perhaps in Asia or so on. Or is there not an easier solution to come to solve this online sales challenge?
Currently not, because it's a legal issue. It's from the Packaging Act. We currently have to theoretically go after each obliged company. Of course, that's impossible. That's why we set up an expert group just these weeks. It will start now in October, with especially with the big platforms, online retailers like Amazon, like eBay, like Alibaba, but also German retailers, and we want to discuss with them on how we best get the information to all the little online retailers from all over the world sending their packaging to Germany, their products, but going hand in hand with the packaging. And we hope via this information path to get better at this issue. But yes, we are thinking about legal possibilities, which would mean make some changes at the Packaging Act. So maybe small retailers can do that via the platforms or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's a big task, and
it's a big task,
very honestly, there is no enforcement. We have enforcement in Germany, of course, but there is no enforcement for example, in China or something like this.
Yeah. And for packaging at the moment, I think it is not a drastic problem. I know from my friends from the WE sector and the lighting sector that, for example, in Ireland, between 30 and 50% of all purchased WE products are coming in the meantime via online sales and are not complying. So half of your products that you are responsible for are not financing the system. This is really then, I think, a drastic problem, which might, I'm sure that this will be more and more important for the packaging part as well. That's why all the materials under EPR in Brussels are calling to make the platforms more responsible, because they have the knowledge, they have the data, and they have the power to ask their suppliers to become compliant or even do it on their behalf. So that's I think the French government is going this way, and I think the European Commission would be responsible to make a European regulation on this and not just pass the ball to the member states.
Absolutely.
A question or two questions for Oliver as well. You have not free already. You have still to work a bit.
I've turned my camera back on again.
The risks that you were explaining to us, are they only applying if there is competition between for-profit PROs, or are the risks the same or similar if there is a competition between non-profit PROs, or a mixture?
I saw the question. I thought it was a very good question. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the incentives arise through the fact that you can profit maximize as a group. So if you had let's say, for the sake of argument, that you have a waste management company, a recycler, and a not-for-profit PRO competing with another not-for-profit PRO that is not vertically integrated, you could see how similar issues would arise. Now, obviously, your ability to profit maximize having a not-for-profit entity is obviously slightly different. I mean, there is a question as to whether a not-for-profit PRO would actually sensibly be vertically integrated. And I have to say, I haven't put my mind to that particular question, but I think it's an interesting question.
Could you imagine that the country could choose for one PRO, but for profit and vertically integrated? Perhaps after a tendering process by the government, or?
Well, so if you have a single PRO operating somewhere, that then effectively becomes an essential facility, because if it becomes an essential counterparty. And so it then starts to look very much like a traditional telecoms network or the gas network or something like that. And so in those circumstances, of course, the market power of that PRO would be very significant. And if you vertically integrated it, you would then probably have to have a degree of functional and structural separation built in, because you couldn't have it just operating as a vertically integrated entity in circumstances where there are other recycling companies or other waste management companies operating in the market. So it comes down to market structure at the end of the day, but I don't think that it would be easy to have a single vertically integrated PRO in circumstances where there is competition for waste management and recycling. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I think that answers the quick question. We of course have the question. Thanks, Peter. What is or is there a difference in the level of free riding between a single PRO and a system with competing PROs? I know figures from Belgium and the Netherlands. With a single service provider, they have a free riding rate, an official below 10%. Germany still has 25%. If you go to some Eastern European countries, you are very quickly officially with 30-40%. I think it is easier to identify free riding if the government has just to deal with one PRO to understand who is participating. In Germany, I think it is still allowed that the company is signing up with several PROs in theory. So the job is to understand how many tonnages of the total he has effectively complied with and how much tonnages might be left. So you have minimum to have the data and a very good IT system to understand whether there are any differences. I don't know how you manage this, Alexander.
Well, I think first of all, you have to have some kind of authority that is able to get those companies who don't participate at all. I mean, those are, for us, currently the biggest issue. And that is not a question whether you have competing PROs or not. If somebody is just not obeying to the law, you have to be able to do something about this. And the PRO is simply not in the position to do that. They can't force them to contract with them. It's not possible. So you need some kind of authority to get after these companies. And I think that's the crucial point, and that might be different in the different member states of the European Union. Honestly, in Germany, it's not easy because it is with the different states in Germany. The enforcement of that, now that we are coming into the game, it's different because we prepare everything. We go after the companies, but before it was with the different states. And you can imagine companies are working in the whole market in whole Germany, and then for one state or even one city, because it's not a state authority. It's in some states of Germany, it's broken down to the local to the communities that are responsible for that issue. And now try to imagine a small city going after a big company for not participating in an EPR system. That was the problem, and I guess that some countries without that federal system might have done that better in the past. Would you allow me just to say something, because I think there was some questions on the costs in Germany.
Yeah.
What we can say is about all the PROs, the market is, I think, roughly 1.3 billion euros, and the costs of running this authority and our supervision authorities is round about 15 million euros.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's quite interesting to see the costs. I think in the worst years in the single service time of DSD, we had a cost of 2 billion, as far as I remember. But in the meantime, we have a deposit system on top of the EPR system with so-called annual costs of 700 million euros, as the Retail Association is saying. So we are still ending up with 2 billion. But so I think it's extremely difficult to really understand the various costs of the system. But of course, the tendering and the change in 2003 brought a big step forward. Also, I think in the efficiency, and the next step will be to reach the new targets for the German market.
Yeah, for the recycling quotas, that
For
will
the recycling,
be, yeah, that will be very difficult.
Because we are changing from 36%, I think, to 60 something, and this is of course a big jump as well, and a lot of improvement of the whole system has to be done.
That's a long way. I'm not sure if that will be reached by time. Well, we will see.
Yeah. Perhaps you can explain a little bit more about the way how you tried to structure the fee modulation, because I think this was a unique approach. If I see all the other countries with competition, to give some kind of standards or guidelines, minimum criteria for the 10 PROs, and it was a 1 year, 2 year process with a lot of experts and a lot of discussions, as far as I know.
What fees do you mean? Do you mean the fees that an obliged company has to pay to the PRO? Because that is, of course, nothing we have to do deal with.
Yeah, but for the fee modulation, you had a working group that defined criteria for the fee modulation, common criteria, so that PRO A is not promoting packaging material A, and the other PRO is promoting another packaging material.
I'm sorry, I'm not that deep into the topic. Sorry.
Okay. Good. Then I think I would pass the floor to Scott for your point of view and a summary, and what still has to be done from our side in the end to solve all the problems that we discussed today.
Well, I thank you, Joachim, and thank you very much to Alexander and Oliver for the presentations. And I know that there's like nearly 400 people on the line here, and half of them from the US and Canada. And I know they have many more questions. So I just want to speak briefly here about what's going on in the United States, just to provide a bridge. So our organization, those that don't know us, we're a multi-stakeholder organization, the Product Stewardship Institute. We are nonprofit, and we've been working for the past 20 years to reduce health and environmental impact from consumer products. So we have half of our group, if you will, is on the left. Our members are state and local governments, 47 states, hundreds of locals. And we have partners on the right that we work with very closely, many of the businesses, environmental groups, and even international governments. And what we're here to do, frankly, is to learn from all of you, Joachim, Alexander, Oliver, to provide that bridge to the United States. So all the experience that you have, we can take in, learn from your mistakes, learn from the best practices that you've developed, and look at the trends, where you've come from and where you're going. And I think there's a lot of questions here, and I hope to translate some of the questions and to be able to just have a free flow of information. So for those, again, that don't know, we've got 119 laws in the US on 14 products in 33 states. Excuse me. And what I wanted to talk about here was the typical PRO, if you will, in the US. We're in the baby steps of this, and many people think, oh my goodness, going to EPR for packaging is so complicated. Well, you've shown you've done it for over 35 years in Europe and over 15 years in Canada, but you can see the development of your systems. And where we are right now is we don't have any laws for packaging yet in the US, but we are on the verge of that right now with a dozen states having bills or introduced them or developing them. Now this slide is just showing in the bottom right that we have 6 PROs. They're all producer run. And they operate for 7 different types of products. Paint Care is paint, Call to Recycle batteries, Med Project is pharmaceuticals and sharps, Mattress Recycling Council, Carpet America Recovery Effort, and the Thermostat Recycling Corporation. So they're single PRO for all the country, for all those laws that I mentioned before. But it's not a monopoly. The laws are not written that way. They're written, as you see on the bottom left, that a producer can join a PRO themselves collectively, or they could join or be legally responsible individually. Well, all of them have joined a PRO. It's the legal term monopsony. It acts like a monopoly, but is not. So the PROs operate similarly to all that you've mentioned here in Europe in a similar way, that they submit a plan to the regulatory agency and they approve that plan and oversee the PRO. Now in the United States, we're moving into having 2 options to manage the multiple PROs. And one is through a government regulatory agency, and the other is a clearinghouse, which is very similar, I think, to what Alexander, you were mentioning of a central agency. The producer is controlling that. They contract out with this clearinghouse in Illinois for electronics, and the government regulatory agency, the example is more on pharmaceuticals right now. So here is the way that it operates. You have the producers choosing the PRO, and there's multiple PROs, and then they're managed with one plan submission in a clearinghouse concept. So the best example of a PRO managed by a government agency is with pharmaceuticals. And right now there's 29 different laws in the United States that have pharmaceutical take-back, 6 states and 23 locals. But they're all with one PRO called Med Project. But there's a second PRO right now called INMAR that has introduced their plan, a stewardship plan, submitted it to a number of agencies for approval. And these regulatory agencies have to approve each of the applications as they come in. And the agencies have now been asked the agencies have now asked these 2 PROs to work together. And you have the Med Project that has been around for a number of years, and new into the market, if you will, a competitor is INMAR. And the agencies have asked them to work together, figure it out, come up with one plan. Well, that hasn't worked so well. So now it looks like the agencies will have to play that role. And one of you mentioned no competition without supervision. So I think that was Alexander. That's where it's moving to. The agencies will have to decide what that unified system will look like. And that's where we're moving, at least for the pharmaceuticals. But another approach here is on the clearinghouse, which is in place right now in Illinois. And that clearinghouse manages 6 PROs. It organizes data collection, fairly apportions the management burden to collect and process scrap electronics. It combines all the stewardship plans and submits one plan to the regulatory agencies, which is extremely important to government agencies, that it be simple. So to play that function and have one plan that is unified, and they are the ones to unify things and make decisions about apportioning those costs, is really important. This is operated by ERCC, which is the group that Jason Linnell is the executive director of that, and he is operating this clearinghouse for Illinois. So they fund these fees that are paid by manufacturers and apportion the costs based on geography. For example, a municipality, all the municipalities in a county would be served by the same PRO. And then the PRO is given a mix of county types. So some might be rural, some might be suburban, urban, and it's up to the clearinghouse to make these decisions and have an equitable system that is seamless amongst the different PROs. So this is where we're at right now in the United States, a very rudimentary form of this, or starting to. We would see that the clearinghouse has a lot of promise to it. And in terms of competition, the for-profits, the nonprofits, those are some of the other lessons that we're going to learn from Alexander, Oliver, and Joachim. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Joachim, and please continue to ask all of the questions for our speakers. I know that there's more coming through, and I will probably have some myself.
Okay, so then we have a few minutes left. So I would ask the question to Oliver from our friend Peter Berkey from the OECD. Is, according to you, requiring monopoly PROs to be non-for-profit a way around potential rent-seeking behavior? Our research at OECD shows that in other sectors, such as hospitals, the not-for-profit status is not impacting firm behavior in significant ways.
Well, I mean, there's a lot in that question, and we have so little time. So let me try to be extremely brief on it. So effectively, the first question is, does a not-for-profit organization react in a different way to a for-profit organization? And I think Peter is right to say that actually, when you look at other industries, the fact that something is not for profit does not mean that it will not behave anti-competitively, which is one of the strange sort of conundrums, I suppose, of not-for-profit organizations. You then sort of look for analogies, and again, I will go to the insurance sector because, for example, when you take, the house builders who then set up an insurance company, a not-for-profit insurance company, to insure the houses, that effectively becomes a monopoly because nobody can compete with it because it is not for profit and it is owned by the industry. So market structure is crucially important in this way. So I think a simple answer to Peter is yes, you could set up a single not-for-profit PRO. The question then is whether you could see that driving down costs in the same way as Alexander has outlined for Germany. I don't think that is a given. And I don't think that just being not-for-profit means that there will not be any risk of anti-competitive behavior. Now, the question then is, could you have a vertically integrated not-for-profit? And we've dealt with that in the first question. So I think it really depends on how it is set up and how it is regulated. But I would echo what has really been the theme of this, which is if you're going to put something into place, you then need to worry about how it is regulated. And I think that is no different for a not-for-profit organization.
Joachim, if I could just jump in.
Yes, please.
The experience that we have in the US, at least the impression, I would say more than experience, is what Oliver had mentioned and what Peter's mentioning, because the Inmar, the new entry into the pharmaceuticals market as a second PRO, is a for-profit. And we have asked our state regulators, our members, if they think that they should be nonprofit. And right now, we have not gotten any of them to say that they would see it as a major problem. So, that's why I'm listening here for, whether or not there's evidence that would show that a nonprofit would be better. The assumption is that nonprofits are more transparent, but right now we have not seen any difference from the state regulatory agencies in terms of their acceptance. So we've opened it up to nonprofit and for-profit.
I suppose, Scott, the question is, what would happen if you had a non-profit competing with a for-profit? Because in those circumstances, you could have potential distortions of the market, which makes it very, very hard to have new entry, and new entry is really what's going to drive down the prices in the way that Alexander outlined.
Good question.
Yeah. We have a few examples in Europe, so we probably have to dig deeper into these circumstances then. So I think the discussion one system or multiple system, this is in the end a seminar, a webinar of its own. I learned that this is a religious discussion. You have believers on both sides, and I think it is up to the governments in the end to take a decision. Probably also certain governments are tending more to believe in that competition will rescue the world, and others have a more state approach, so they would naturally choose one provider. But probably we can design the discussion around this during next year, because I think that would be very interesting for all of us as well. I would completely sign the great statement of Alexander. No competition without supervision, even no EPR without supervision, even more if you have competing PROs. And that's why I think the Commission has put in the new minimum requirements a lot of obligations for member states. I'm not sure whether the member states are aware of this, but they have to establish much more reporting, monitoring, and enforcement than today. I only think that 3 or 4 member states have really authorities which are caring for the EPR system. In most of the countries, no one is interested. It is EPR, so it is the matter of business, and they should please solve the problems of their own, which is not working, as we have seen. We need a lot of supervision, guidance, and enforcement to ensure that we are behaving in the right way. That's I think, and we have a good example now in Germany, hopefully followed by the authorities, that they fine perhaps a few cases that you identified that will be very interesting. German people tend to go immediately to court. So the question will be answered if we have some court decisions. I think I don't know any other country that is so keen to go to court and to fight there for your right as this is a typical German behavior. But if you have some court cases, then usually the people start to follow. So I hope within the next 1 or 2 years we have some final decisions so that certain companies are following the rules. I would think I will stop here. There's a lot of topics. I have to go through all the questions again for future webinars and seminars. Governance, as you highlighted, Scott. If you design a PRO from scratch, what is the best way to design it? Who should be the owners? Who should sit in the board? If you allow not only obliged companies in a board, you need again a lot of new governance rules to avoid that there is a misuse. So I think something we should tackle in 21 if other people are interested as well. Thanks again, Oliver, for your great presentation. Alexander, also great job. Thanks a lot. Scott, as usual, my great counterpart. Looking forward to see you latest in 4 weeks when we have our final webinar in 20 about the 3 country cases: Canada, Italy, and probably Bulgaria. With a lot of interesting insights, I guess, a lot of different approaches that might bring a lot of knowledge for our audience. Thanks again to ISWA, to Leonie and Ellen. You're doing a fantastic job here. Happen. I'm participating in a lot of webinars, and this is always the best organized one, I can tell you. So thanks a lot to all. Have a good remaining week, and please stay healthy. Yeah, that's the most important thing. Okay, thanks a lot to all of you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Well.
Bye bye.